I came home to my mattress leaning against the washer and my brother's boxes in my room. Dad called it temporary, and I opened a folder and started saving everything. I had been living in the upstairs bedroom for 2 years, paying rent every month. The arrangement was simple: $800 on the first, plus I covered the Wi-Fi and split the electric bill. Dad seemed to appreciate the steady income, and I appreciated having a place while I saved for a down payment. Evan and I texted now and then. He lived across town with his girlfriend until that fell apart, and suddenly Dad was asking if I'd mind helping out for a bit. I said sure, assuming Evan would take the den or crash on the couch for a week or two. Instead, I came home on a Tuesday evening to find my mattress propped next to the washing machine and Evan's duffel bag stacked on my bedroom floor. Dad was in the kitchen when I walked in. I asked what was going on. "Evan needs the room," he said. "You can use the laundry area. It's temporary." I looked at the narrow space between the washer and the utility sink. There was no window, just a vent grate and exposed hookups. The back door opened 6 inches from where my head would be if I laid the mattress down. "For how long?" I asked. 2 weeks tops," Dad said. "Be a team player, Maya." I took a breath and kept my voice level. "Can you put that in writing?" He frowned. "It's my house. I don't need to put anything in writing." That sentence was the pivot. I pulled out my phone, opened a new note, and typed the date, the time, and a 3-line summary. Then I took 4 photos: my mattress against the washer, Evan's boxes in my room, the laundry room floor space, and the vent grate above the dryer. I went upstairs to the room that had been mine, found my laptop bag under one of Evan's boxes, and carried it back down. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a folder on my desktop. I titled it House Receipts. I pulled my bank statements and filtered by the memo line. Every transfer since March was labeled Rent, April, Rent May, and so on. One transfer from 14 months ago was labeled Deposit. I downloaded them as PDFs and dropped them into the folder. Then I scrolled back through my texts with Dad and screenshot the thread where he'd written, "Evan's moving in for a bit. Can you be flexible?" And my reply, "Of course, happy to help." I found the message he'd sent 2 hours earlier while I was still at work. "Move your stuff to laundry for now." I saved that too. Then I sent myself an email with the timestamp, the photo file names, and a short bullet point summary of what Dad had said in the kitchen. I wasn't interested in arguing. I was interested in not sleeping next to a washing machine. The next morning, I called a tenant rights clinic I'd found through the city's housing website. I spoke to a counselor named Mr. Lee. I kept it high level: month-to-month tenant, paying rent and utilities. Landlord wants to move me to a laundry room with no notice. Mr. Lee was patient. He explained that changes to living arrangements generally require proper notice, that laundry rooms aren't considered habitable bedrooms under most codes, and that I should continue paying rent and keep everything in writing. I thanked him, took notes, and added them to the folder. That afternoon, I went back into the laundry room with my phone. I shot close-ups: the absence of an egress window, the dryer vent running along the ceiling, the breaker box mounted on the wall where a nightstand might go. I checked the metadata on each photo to confirm the date and time were embedded, then sketched a quick floor plan on paper and photographed that too. When Dad came home, I was calm. I met him in the kitchen with a printout of the city housing code section on legal bedrooms. I'd highlighted the line about egress and minimum square footage. "I can't sleep in there," I said. "It's not safe and it's not a bedroom." He barely glanced at the page. "You're being dramatic." "Then let's get it inspected," I said. "No one's inspecting anything," he said. "Evan needs privacy. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I nodded, went back to my laptop, and emailed him a link to the city code page. I copied myself on the message. Evan came downstairs an hour later. I asked him directly how long he planned to stay. "Just till I get back on my feet," he said. Dad said it'd be fine. Did he tell you when he moved your stuff in? I asked. Evan looked uncomfortable. He mentioned it last week. I texted myself that sentence with a timestamp and went for a walk. The house had belonged to my mother. When she died 3 years ago, it passed into a trust with Dad as trustee. Evan and I were listed as beneficiaries. I'd seen the cover page once at the attorney's office and remembered that my Aunt Rita was named as the successor co-trustee. I dug out the folder from Mom's memorial and found the trust summary. It listed Dad's role and noted that the trustee was required to manage the property in the beneficiary's best interests and keep it in good condition. I scanned the page and emailed the attorney who'd handled the trust, Ms. Delgado. I kept the message short. I was paying rent. Dad wanted to move me to a non-compliant space, and I wanted to confirm what duties applied to occupancy and income use. She replied within a day. She couldn't give legal advice, but offered to send a neutral letter summarizing the trustee's obligations. I said yes. 2 days later, the letter arrived by email, seeing Dad and Aunt Rita. It was carefully worded. The trustee must act in the beneficiary's best interests, maintain the property in compliance with local codes, and document any changes to occupancy or income arrangements. Aunt Rita replied to the thread within an hour. We need to follow this. That was the midpoint. The dynamic had shifted. I made another cup of tea, sat down, and drafted a simple proposal. I keep my room. Evan takes the den or the couch. We review the arrangement in writing after 30 days. Rent continues as agreed. I saved it as a draft but didn't send it yet. Dad sent me a text that night. You need to move your stuff by Friday or I'll do it for you. I replied in writing. One short paragraph. I was a month-to-month tenant. Any changes required proper notice under city and state law, and I'd continue paying rent while we worked out compliant terms. I attached a screenshot of my rent history. Then I opened a new savings account and transferred $800 into it, labeled Rent Holding, Pending Resolution. I sent Dad a screenshot showing the funds were set aside. He didn't reply. The next afternoon, I was loading groceries into my car when Evan came out to the driveway. He looked sheepish. Dad's pretty mad, he said. I know, I said. He told me this would just be a couple weeks, Evan said. But honestly, he promised me your room like a week before you found out. I stopped and looked at him. So it wasn't temporary. He shrugged. I mean, I'll leave when I can. I just don't know when that is. I opened my phone, typed his exact words into a note, promised me your room like a week before, and don't know when that is, and thanked him. Back inside, I sent one more email to the city housing department, asking for confirmation on laundry room bedroom standards. Ms. Chen replied the next morning, laundry rooms do not meet the code definition of a habitable bedroom, and using them as sleeping spaces could create insurance and egress issues. I forwarded her email to Dad without comment. He called me an hour later. His voice was tight. You're making this a nightmare. I'm keeping your deposit for the stress you've caused. I waited until he hung up, then I opened a spreadsheet. I listed my original deposit, $800, next to the transfer date. Below that, I added every utility bill I'd paid in my name, every rent payment, and a line for cleaning and ordinary wear. I attached the spreadsheet to an email, along with scans of the deposit transfer, 3 months of utility bills, and my rent history. I CC'd Aunt Rita and Ms. Delgado. The subject line was, Deposit Reconciliation Request. I sent it and then spent the weekend touring apartments. I found a small studio 10 minutes away, available in 4 weeks. The rent was $650. I filled out the application and put down a holding deposit. On Monday evening, Aunt Rita called. She asked if I'd be willing to sit down with Dad and Evan to sort this out properly. I said yes, as long as the meeting stayed factual. We scheduled it for that Thursday at 6 p.m., at the house around the dining table. I arrived 5 minutes early with a thin binder. Inside were printouts of the rent receipts, the trust letter, the code email from Ms. Chen, the deposit ledger, and a timeline I'd drafted on a single page. Dad and Evan were already seated. Aunt Rita joined by speakerphone. I set my phone in the center of the table. I opened the binder and walked through the timeline. I started with my original move-in, the rent arrangement, and the deposit. I showed the text where Dad had said, "Move to laundry for now," the photos of the laundry room, and the city's confirmation that it wasn't a legal bedroom. Then I read the relevant sentence from Ms. Delgado's letter. The trustee must act in the beneficiary's best interests and keep the property compliant. Aunt Rita spoke from the phone. "Frank, if you're forcing a code violation or retaliating against a tenant who happens to be your daughter, I'll need to ask Ms. Delgado to schedule a formal trustee review of how the house is being used." Dad's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I slid a printed page across the table. It was my 30-day notice to vacate. At the bottom, I'd written a proposed move-out date, 4 weeks out, and a deposit return amount, $800, minus nothing, because I'd kept the room clean and there was no damage. "I've found another place," I said. "Here's my notice, here's the breakdown, and I'll return the keys on this date with a final utility reconciliation." Evan looked down at his hands. Dad stared at the paper. Aunt Rita broke the silence. "That sounds fair." Dad exhaled. "Fine." 2 days later, a cashier's check for $800 arrived in the mail. Evan moved his things into the den. I moved my mattress back upstairs for the final 3 weeks, more out of principle than comfort. On move-out day, I cleaned my room, photographed it empty, and ran a final reading on the electric meter. I printed a 1-page reconciliation showing my last payment covered through that morning, attached the meter photo, and slipped it into an envelope with the house key. I left the envelope on the kitchen counter, labeled with the date and the words, "Final key and utilities." I carried the last box to my car, locked my studio door behind me an hour later, and unpacked in silence. I made tea, sat on the floor, and let myself breathe. I sent a short text to Dad. "We can talk after the trustee review. Until then, I need space." I muted the family group chat for a week and didn't check it. Aunt Rita followed up a few days later. Ms. Delgado had scheduled a meeting to review the trust's property use and record keeping. Dad would need to document any rental income and show that house expenses were being handled appropriately. She also mentioned carefully that part of my rent had been going toward Evan's car insurance without my knowledge. I thanked her for the update and told her I'd be available if the review needed my records. A month later, Evan moved out. He sent me a short apology text. I replied, "I appreciate that," and left it there. I didn't go back to the house. I updated my mailing address, forwarded a digital copy of my receipts to Ms. Delgado for the trust file, and kept the original binder in a drawer. I didn't win a room. I kept my footing. Temporary ended on my timeline, not his. I left with my receipts and my sleep back.